I think we will slowly start getting into things. So again, first of all, just a really warm welcome to everybody. Happy to share the latest about Kaiterra's new product line. So for those that aren't yet super familiar with Kaiterra, we spent the last decade plus, helping the world's leading organizations prioritize health and well-being through indoor environmental monitoring. Right? We work with Fortune 500s, we work with some of the largest global REITs, as well as some of the most iconic buildings in the world, the ones that you see on on all the postcards. And we've spent a lot of time, and I've personally spent a lot of time inside the spaces of companies like Microsoft, Google, Salesforce, Okta, these companies that care deeply about their people and are willing to invest in creating fantastic experiences around coming to work. Now, before we get into the product today, I want to take a little step back because we have a very diverse group of people that are on this call or that are going to be watching this webinar. Some of you own and operate your own buildings. Some of you are tenants. Some have full access to the BMS and can see and control everything. Some have no access to the BMS and see nothing. And a lot of people also have a mix of buildings, right? So some leased, some owned, some controlled, some totally blind. And so I thought it'd be useful to take a step back and just kind of level set on something very fundamental, which is where does the air in your building actually come from? Well, the short answer is it starts outside, right? We pull in air from outside buildings into the building. We filter it, we condition it, so heating it or cooling it, bringing it to a reasonable temperature, and then we deliver it through the ductwork into the occupied space. Now, depending on the building, depending on the country, that some of that air might get recirculated, right? It might go back through the system. It gets mixed with a percentage of fresh outdoor air, and then that combined air gets filtered and treated again, and then it comes back around. So that's kind of the loop, right? Outside air in, filter, treat, deliver, recirculate. Simple enough. Here's where it gets interesting. And this is really important for the context of everything that we are going to discuss today, which is who's responsible for what here, right? So the landlord, and this varies a little bit by country, this varies a little bit by region, but broadly, globally, this is quite similar. The landlord or the owner is typically responsible for the air up to the point where it enters the tenant's space. So as you can see in this image, that air makes its way through the building and then it enters the tenant zone. And so from a landlord's perspective, that's where your responsibility ends, right? That's it. You filter it, you condition it, you deliver it through the duct, and your job ends at the diffuser. Or in some countries, a little bit further or a little bit before that. But what happens after that, right? Everything that happens after that is on the tenant. So the tenant might bring in furniture that off-gases VOCs. They might decide to put a kitchen in the middle of their office. Please don't do this. They might decide to pack 200 people into a floor that was designed for, 100. And they can, and often do, kind of mess up the air within the actual space. And then in some buildings, that return air goes back through the system and can affect other tenants. So this is something that I see quite often, which is that you've got a complaint that comes from a tenant about something that smells in the air quality. They talk to the landlord. The landlord does an investigation, and they find that four floors underneath, another tenant was renovating using all types of terrible glues that are off-gassing VOCs. They're painting, and they haven't properly sealed the place, and that air is just going back into the building and being redistributed to all the other tenants. Who gets blamed in this situation? Probably the landlord. So the landlord isn't responsible for the air that someone is breathing at their desk, right? They're responsible for the air that they are delivering. And that is sort of the critical distinction here. And that brings us to the question, when should we monitor in the space, and when and why should we monitor air quality within the actual ductwork inside a building? And the answer when it comes to this sort of landlord and tenant relationship and understanding who's doing what, that answer lies in the ductwork, because that is where the accountability lives. So duct is where accountability lives. It's the last point of control for air before it reaches your tenant. So if you're a landlord, measuring in the duct tells you exactly what you delivered, Not what the tenant did with it afterwards, right? But what you delivered. So that's your evidence, that's your proof of performance. It's your proof of having a high performing building. Now, if you're a tenant, measuring in the duct tells you exactly what you're receiving, right? Before your people, before your furniture, your operations touch it. So if there's ever a problem, you know immediately whether it started with you and your decision to put a kitchen in, or whether it started with your landlord. So whether you own the building or you rent the space, in-duct air quality monitoring answers the same question, which is the air that's being delivered into the space actually clean? So that's my HVAC Real Estate 101 over. That's what today's session is about. There's going to be value here regardless of your situation, whether you own, whether you operate, you lease, or some combination of all three. So with that context, let's talk a little bit about what is changing in the market and what is making this more urgent than ever. In the past few years, especially with return to office, something fundamental has changed in commercial real estate. The expectation of what a workplace is has fundamentally shifted. If a Fortune 500 today is trying to get people to come back to the office, you can't just say, here's a desk, here's some free coffee, and a roof over your head, right? You have to earn the commute. That phrase keeps coming up in conversations with the world's top employers, with FM firms, with landlords. And this has massive consequences on employers, which leads to massive consequences for landlords and building owners. A landmark property used to mean a great address, a nice zip code, right? Maybe there's a gym in the lobby. Those are table stakes. If you, as a landlord, are going to attract a Fortune 500 tenant today, you're no longer selling a certain number of square feet or square meters. You are selling a high-performing environment, right? A high-performance environment. You're promising to your tenants a space where their people can thrive. And that is because the function of real estate is fundamentally shifting. It's moving from a cost center that is where we work to a strategic asset that enables our people to thrive. And this is creating a bit of a new tension in the landlord-tenant relationship. Specifically with indoor environmental quality, for a long time, air quality in commercial buildings was just an assumption, right? Tenants assumed that the air was fine. Employees assumed that somebody was taking care of it. Nobody questioned it because no one was actually measuring it. That has changed. There has been an enormous swell in awareness, and it starts with the employees. Right? People now walk into their offices with CO2 monitors. They check AQI apps on their phones. Like they notice when a space feels stuffy, and they don't shrug it off anymore. So now you have this chain reaction. Employees are asking their employers, what's the air quality like in here? And employers are turning around and asking their landlords, what are you actually delivering into my space? And the landlords are realizing that they have no idea and they don't have a good answer. So air quality used to be an assumption. Now it's a question. And if you don't have data, the reality is you don't have an answer. And here's what this looks like on the ground. Like we work with one of the most iconic commercial buildings in downtown Manhattan. Everyone knows it. In that building, 3 out of 4 anchor tenants use our indoor air quality monitoring solutions within their own tenant space. The landlord, they don't have the same visibility. So as a landlord, like the people inside your building probably know more about your building and the performance of it than you do. And that's not really the position that you want to be in, right? But there's a structural problem that has always prevented this. As a landlord, you generally don't have access to the privately leased space, right? You're technically on the hook, and certainly within the tenant's eyes, you're on the hook for delivering a safe and a healthy environment. But the problem is you can't see what the tenant sees, right? You're seeing something different. There's a critical visibility gap between the air that you are providing and the air that they're actually breathing. So the question I would ask is, what's the cost of constantly saying, I don't know? Like, think about what happens when something goes wrong and you don't actually have the data. So you're the last to know, right? The way you find out is through a complaint, which is not a great way to find out about things. You scramble, so you bring in your engineers, facility team, everyone drops everything. You have to call a specialist. So you've got uncertainty You've got reactive maintenance because your team that was probably working on something a lot more important has to drop it. The facilities team is kind of running around trying to identify the root cause. The resolution is often very costly, and you need to quite often bring in a third-party expert to take samples of air quality to try to diagnose and find the root cause because you just don't have that baseline of visibility. What does that lead to? That leads to tenant dissatisfaction, right? Um, and it can escalate. If you are pursuing a certification like well, and I've seen this many times, if your tenants are pursuing a certification like well, and then they fail an air quality performance test, this isn't just a slightly annoying operational slip up. It's project delays, it's legal friction, ultimately, it's tenant churn. So you're presented with a choice. Would you rather know about problems before your tenants do, giving you the opportunity to address them, to fix them, to proactively demonstrate performance, give them a monthly report and say, this is exactly what we're delivering into your space. Don't worry, this is a healthy building. Here are all the metrics. Or would you rather receive a complaint? Would you rather be reactive, hearing about problems when tenants bring them up, and then running around kind of like a headless chicken, trying to figure out what went wrong because you don't have any data? Or would you rather send your tenants a report, right? I'm just going to put out there that running your business reactively based on complaints is probably not a good way to run your business. So, what if there was a better choice, right? What if you could know exactly what you're delivering to your tenants without ever entering their space? What if you had evidence to prove that your building is performing before they even ask? What if you could reduce those complaints by a massive percentage because you're not waiting for a complaint, you're proactively giving them data, right? And that is exactly why we built the Sensedge Duct. So we built this to solve a specific problem. Landlords and building owners around the world are flying blind. The Sensedge Duct gives them that visibility. And just I'll step back for a moment. Quick note here: everything I've talked about so far is landlord, landlord, landlord. But there is also an incredibly strong argument for the tenants, and I will get to that. Don't worry, because I know we've got a lot of people in here that are primarily leasing their own space. So the Sensedge Duct is not just another air quality sensor. It really is a commercial grade diagnostics tool that's been specifically engineered for high velocity HVAC environments. So we didn't just take an air quality sensor and slap it on the inside of a duct. We really re-engineered this. We thought about what is the physics inside the ductwork and how can and totally reimagining what you can actually do with this data. Because once you start digging in, and you will see this, there's so much value in the data that you can get from this. Okay, let's get into the weeds. So inside a duct, the air is chaotic, right? It's turbulent, it moves fast, and then it doesn't. It stops, and then it moves fast again. So you can't just stick a sensor on the inside of the walls of the ductwork and expect to get an accurate reading. In fact, you probably can't even get a signal out to even get readings out of that. So what we did is design this dual probe system that pulls air out of the duct and into this sealed sensing chamber. So that's what you see here. Now you might be asking, okay, well, if that box is sitting outside of the duct with the probes inside, how do we ensure accuracy for things like temperature and humidity, as well as some other parameters where the reading needs to reflect the actual conditions inside the duct and not in a box on the outside? Answer is simple. Certain sensors are located directly within the airstream inside the duct itself, and that gives us sub-second response times for those parameters directly from within the airstream. Now, other parameters that benefit from a more stable pressure environment, those are measured within that sealed chamber. And we've tested this across an extremely wide range of air speeds, duct shapes, duct sizes. It works. This is Kaiterra, of course. So we went with our typical modular architecture. Now, in a commercial building, sensors can drift over time, especially if these are put in a duct where the conditions are pretty harsh, especially if you're locating this at the outdoor air supply, right? Because what you're bringing in then, especially if you imagine this in a location like New Delhi, historically Beijing, where you're directly measuring outdoor air, you can be exposed to very high levels of pollutants. Middle East is in the general Gulf region is a great example as well, where you can have a lot of coarse particles in the outdoor air supply. So you definitely want the ability to be able to easily recalibrate these sensors. So with this design, you simply pop open the housing, you swap out the module, you put a new one in. The device doesn't even go offline. You don't lose any readings, and you have essentially a brand new sensing element, brand new device here. So this removes one of the biggest complexities around accurately measuring air quality readings within ductwork. You can also upgrade these modules over time as we release new additional parameters, additional modules. So the device itself is designed to last 10 plus years, and you can always make sure that you have the latest technology and the latest sensing elements simply by swapping out these modules. By the way, we're constantly releasing new modules. I think we had a couple come out last year. We've got more coming out this year. So this is a really fantastic solution where you install it once, and every year, as our ability to measure more things, measure more accurately, as that goes up, you're always getting the latest technology. Let's talk about parameters. So we've got everything you'd expect, particulate matter, VOCs, CO2, NO2, CO, ozone, temperature, humidity, like basically everything. By measuring all of these parameters, you can get a fantastic picture of what is actually being delivered into a space. And just a side note, this is one of those places where it really makes sense to measure a lot of these things. So for example, I might not want to or need to measure carbon monoxide in every conference room in a building, right? There's not many sources of carbon monoxide in a conference room. But to do this in my duct actually makes a lot of sense, right? Because it's very low incremental cost, but I can immediately see if there's anything that is in the supply air that shouldn't be there. Especially with these outdoor pollutants like ozone and NO2, I mean, it's a fantastic opportunity to make sure that none of that is getting into the tenant spaces. Now, one new thing that I'm really excited about is the filter efficiency module. So this is brand new and this is a pretty big deal. So we know that building engineers need more than just air quality data, right? When you're trying to go from understanding what is happening in a space to why, you need operational data, data that you can use in your day-to-day work. And this filter efficiency kit adds two new sensors, differential pressure and airspeed. So you can install one probe before the filter and another probe after the filter and be able to look at the differential pressure between those. You can also look at the reduction in PM 2.5 readings. Why does this matter? Well, I can understand if my filters are actually performing, right? Are they doing what they're supposed to do? I can do predictive filter maintenance. I can start to see exactly when a filter is beginning to clog, not based on like a random calendar date because the manufacturer told you that these filters should always be switched out every 3 months, which, by the way, makes no sense. If I'm using the same filter in New Delhi, versus Greenland, like those should not be changed on the same schedule. That makes absolutely no sense, right? They should be changed based on actual performance data. A clogged filter uses more energy because it has a higher pressure drop. It filters less effectively, and it degrades overall air quality. Now you can see that for the first time really happening in real time. You can understand exactly how much is being removed along the way. Now, some people here are probably thinking, I already have differential pressure in my BMS. Why do I need this? Yeah, and yes, many BMSs do have a differential pressure reading across a filter, or they've got an alarm that triggers at a certain threshold. But here's the difference. A BMS is designed for automation and alerting. It excels at that. It is not designed to measure long-term data trends across millions and potentially billions of data points over multiple months and over multiple seasons. But that's exactly what you need when you're looking at filter performance, because this stuff doesn't happen overnight. If you want to understand the true performance over time, this is a much, much longer process. Also, I have seen so many filters installed incorrectly. Be it it's backwards, it's the wrong way around. There's a giant, this giant 3 centimeter gap on the top, and air is just flowing over it. It's not even being filtered. I've seen filters being installed with the shrink wrap still on it. You can imagine what the pressure drop looks like on that. So these will immediately be picked up. And the other thing, which is which might sound dumb, but in the real world, this just happens all the time, which is it's wonderful you've got the data and it's wonderful that it's in your BMS, but how many people can actually see that data? Can all the people that need it see it? And unfortunately, the reality is often that only one person in the basement sees that data, and they might not really be paying attention. The benefit of getting all of this data into the cloud and being able to run analytics is that everyone can see it. You can run long-term analytics. You can catch problems before they become problems. And I'll show you a little bit of what that looks like in just a moment. So this unlocks predictive filter maintenance using data, not fixed schedules. It makes installation and commissioning verification actually possible. There was some great posts on LinkedIn I saw a while ago where it was like diagnosing a building that had high PM 2.5 levels. And the team was really happy that they managed to trace it back to a filter that had not been installed properly. And the air was just going around the edge of the filter. It wasn't actually going through the filter. It's great that air quality monitoring within the space unlocked the ability to sort of work out that root cause. But if you had this data, that would not have been after it impacted the people trying to work backwards to what the problem was. You would see the problem immediately, right? Ventilation rate verification. Now that we've got airspeed, we know the sizes of the ducts, we know exactly how much air, what volume of air is actually being delivered. There is a fantastic opportunity here around energy savings, not delivering more air than we need to, while still meeting code and delivering the correct amount of CFM per person. And of course, we can do all sorts of things around HVAC performance diagnostics, right? We can immediately see what's my outdoor supply, what's my return, what's my supply air, what are the PM 2.5 readings of each of these, how much are those numbers changing? We can look at wildfire season, view data across multiple months at a time, and see this is what we were seeing with the outdoor air. And on the right, this is the supply air. Are we hitting our targets for reduction in terms of PM 2.5 during the times that it really matters? Okay, how do you install these? Good news is these devices are incredibly easy to install. You can mount them on a supply duct or return duct. You can mount them on the outdoor air intake, basically giving you an accurate picture of your outdoor air quality. And we support two installation routes, wired, so that would be your low voltage or PoE, and also fully wireless. And by that, I mean both for power and connectivity. So running on batteries, zero cabling needed, uh, transmitting data sub-gigahertz to our gateways, just like the Sensedge Go, for those that are familiar with the Sensedge Go. You literally just put this on your duct and you can start measuring. And like all Kaiterra products, the Sensedge Duct is both cloud and BMS ready. You don't have to choose, you can have both. So data will flow into the Kaiterra data platform. You can do your long-term data analytics. You can do trend analysis, reporting. You can send out monthly reports to all of your stakeholders. If you're a landlord, you can send that to your tenants directly. If you're a tenant measuring the supply air that's coming in from your landlord, you can send that to your landlord, right? If there are any problems, your landlord will find out about it. So you can just automate this entire process of trying to communicate between the landlord and tenant relationship. So I mean, this is it's hard to overestimate or overstate how valuable this is. And then of course you have your BMS integration, right? So you can still do direct automation based off of this. Sensors speak BACnet over IP as well as Modbus. So that's fantastic for alerts and automation that's happening within the actual building itself. As I said, the BMS is great for automation. It's great for alerts to people that are inside the building who can do something about it. But honestly, the BMS is not the right tool for diagnostics. It's not the right tool to understand root causes, to find patterns amongst billions. And I'm not exaggerating when I say billions. When we actually do the math on these deployments across buildings over time, you are absolutely looking at literally billions of data points. And the BMS was never made for that. And that is where the Kaiterra data platform comes in. So I will share, I'll switch to another tab quickly if you will bear with me for just a second here. Okay, so for those of you that are familiar, you are looking at the Kaiterra data platform. Here I'm looking at an overview of my portfolio with buildings all around the world. Of course, I can immediately see globally how they're performing like this, if there's anything I need to look into. And let's just jump into the downtown office here. Now I can see the performance of all of my spaces here. Again, I can see summaries, detailed views. I can see live values versus time within targets. And what's new here is I can actually see my HVAC equipment. Again, here I'm looking at live values, but if we just want to look at what percentage of the time we're meeting our targets, we can easily do that. And this is grouped by HVAC equipment, right? So I've got my AHU1, AHU2, but let's do this by air stage. So here I've got all my outdoor air, and I can see that, makes sense, generally performing pretty similarly at different air intakes. And here I can see my supply air. So this is really what I want to be, this is really what I care about, right? Am I delivering the correct levels of CO2, of PM2.5, of other pollutants? Is the volume of air that I'm delivering correct? And this one's kind of interesting right here. Here we're looking at the reduction in PM2.5 between the outdoor and the supply air. And this one's at 75%, while everything else is at 94%. So I can just jump into that. And this appears like any other Kaiterra device. Here I'm looking at the airflow, and you can see very clearly that probably the weekend over here, the hours when the HVAC came on, and we start to see the airspeed increase, and it's very stable over time. Over here, we can see filter monitoring that I was just talking about, and so we can easily see how this filter is starting to maybe not perform as it should, which probably explains why the performance of the filter is not where we want it to be, right? So yes, you should be replacing this filter now. And of course, you'll be able to set alerts for these things and all of that. So there's a lot that you can do with this data. And if you get the whole benefits of the Kaiterra platform. So I can compare this with the average of the building or the floor, any other piece of mechanical HVAC equipment. So show me a comparison of the supply versus the outdoor versus the return all on one chart. So this is fantastic. You can look at different metrics alongside each other. And because all of this data is going into one place, I get the benefits of all these features that you may already be familiar with and using within our platform, such as building diagnostics. So to go from raw readings to root cause analysis, right? Where here I can immediately see, and these are millions of data points that are being processed in the background, by the way. So there's a huge amount of data that's going into here. And I can immediately see the 10th percentile, the 90th percentile for this building, and that overall it looks like it's running a little bit cool. If there are any outliers, I can immediately spot them, like this outlier over here for CO2. It's probably a space that I need to take a look at. All right, and I can jump into any of these and immediately see over here the overall performance. So we don't have time for a full demonstration of the Kaiterra platform today, but again, there's just so much that you can do with this data. And really, for the first time, we're able to get the data in the spaces, but also throughout the entire mechanical system, which allows us to really start to triangulate and pinpoint any issues. The moment something goes wrong, we know about it, we can go fix it. Now, I know I've talked a lot about the landlord experience today. Let's talk a little bit about tenants, right? Everything has kind of been landlord perspective, but the opportunity is just as powerful for tenants. And actually, that is where we're seeing a ton of adoption already today. Wireless is fantastic. You literally just pop this onto your ductwork. There's no cables, there's no coordination with building management. You're immediately measuring exactly what your landlord is delivering. And I've heard so many stories about where it's written into the contract that there's a flush out period in the morning, and then we have full air supply from, let's say, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And for some reason, people just started to feel a little bit hot, a little bit uncomfortable in the afternoon. And after much digging, you realize that the landlord has slowly been shifting the turn off time from 6 p.m. to 5:45 to 5:30, just kind of tuning that back and waiting to see if anyone says anything and if anyone notices. those problems go away. It is incredibly easy to find when something like that is happening when you have this data. So really, for the first time, there is the ability to have full transparency uh, in terms of what the building's actually doing. So if you care about your indoor environment, and you should, hopefully you do, that's why you're here, this gives you data to hold your landlord accountable or to confirm that they're doing a great job. It's going to help you with your decisions around where you should lease offices in the future. So, to bring all of this together and kind of bring it back to the bottom line, number one, you have the power of liability and brand. When a tenant disputes air quality, you don't want to argue with them. You don't want to say, well, I think we're doing a good job. You just want to send them a report. Look, here's the data. This is the air that I delivered. Exact same thing for the tenant, right? It makes the conversation collaborative rather than adversarial. Operational efficiency, right? Your team stays proactive rather than reactive. The amount of time that you can save by knowing and having the data to what the root cause is and just going and fixing that instead of running around trying to work it out for 3 weeks is enormous. You do not need to call in third parties to investigate everything, which often costs thousands of dollars per trip. Use the data to find root causes, implement fixes in hours, not weeks. Tenants don't even notice. You notice because your complaints go down. And ultimately, this is all about giving you a competitive edge, right? When you use this data to communicate transparently with your tenants and your stakeholders, you build confidence. You strengthen your brand as one that isn't just offering a physical space and a pretty zip code. It promises performance and outcomes because that at the end of the day, that is what tenants care about. You're building the flywheel, right? Where you can attract top tier talent, you can attract top tier tenants, you can retain them for longer, you can charge rent premiums because you are providing a fantastic space, and then you can invest that back into your building and create that flywheel. That is why we're already seeing a lot of the world's leading organizations and buildings already implementing this. Right? We see one of the world's largest commercial real estate developers, tens of millions of square feet across multiple continents. They're implementing this. Their tenants, many of them were already using Kaiterra sensors to monitor their indoor air quality. So this is a fantastic opportunity. I really want to commend the developer here. They made a decision, right? Rather than being in the dark with their tenants knowing more than they do, they decided to install Sensedge Duct to understand exactly what they're delivering. And many of these in a similar position have gone a step further. They're actively sharing that data with their tenants. So it's become a collaborative relationship instead of this adversarial one. We've got a global financial institution everyone's familiar with, which is deploying this across both their headquarters, but also their branch network. So for them, the driver is simple. Like they lease space in hundreds of buildings around the world. Some have a BMS that they can tap into, but many don't, right? So they really have no consistent way to know what air quality they were getting from their landlords. Sensedge Duct gives them that visibility, right? It's a standardized way to hold every landlord accountable, regardless of what building infrastructure exists. It's a way for all of that data to exist in one place, in one dashboard where they can see the performance of all the different landlords all across the world. They can even group the data by landlord, right? So you can easily get an average of what is the, let's say, performance of all the buildings that are owned by this company versus that one, which obviously has major implications in terms of future leasing decisions. And finally, we've got a major global professional services firm, and they have a mandate to occupy well-certified buildings. So they only occupy well-certified, well-core buildings. That gives them a great baseline around good air quality, but a lot of these certifications are still point in time. So they wanted continuous assurance that their air is performing, right? Not just on testing day, but on every day thereafter. And critically, if something isn't right, they want to be able to see whether the issue originated from them or from the landlord's delivery. Because if it's their issue, they're going to put a lot of resources into trying to work out what should we be doing differently? What went wrong? How do we change our policies? How do we change our operations? That's a big investment. Now, it has a payoff because you end up with better air. But if that wasn't the problem to begin with, I want to know right away and be able to send that report to the landlord so that they can fix this in a couple hours. So Sensedge Duct lets them do exactly that. They troubleshoot collaboratively with the building owner using a shared set of data. They make sure that their certification will pass before the assessor even walks in the door. And they know that they're maintaining that year round, not just on the day that someone came in and took a test. So with the Sensedge duct, you are no longer reactive. You're actually in control. You can become proactive. Again, this isn't, for the landlords, you aren't just a landlord. You're a provider of high quality, high performance, verified air to your tenants. So thank you all for joining us today. We're going to jump into Q&A, and I think there's a list of questions in the Q&A. Okay, so there's a really interesting question here around to what extent is this new duct monitor aligned with well? For instance, if I implemented this module, could I reduce the amount of sensors, the amount of parameters that they measure inside the rooms? I believe today no there's no mention of measurement in the ducts within the well standard, and it's a fantastic question. I would suggest reaching out to the IWBI to get their opinion on this. So sorry, that's a bit of a cop-out answer, but um, we've got a question here for the wireless battery powered solution. How often is the device sampling to achieve 8 years of battery life? Oh, I love this question because it's something that I'm incredibly proud of. Our engineering team has done a fantastic job. So the majority of parameters are being sampled every single minute, believe it or not. So CO2, temperature, humidity, VOCs, air, atmospheric pressure, those are being sampled every single minute, and it is running for up to 8 years on that. Now, PM 2.5, that would be probably at 10-minute intervals, but don't quote me on that because there's a lot of math here, and I can only do so much math in my head at one time. But that's sort of the default sampling rate for your PM 2.5. Okay, looking at other questions. I've got tenant complaints before based on cheap Amazon monitors. Yes, many people have. How could this actually help us handle those disputes? Yeah, I mean, so that's a really interesting question, and there's, I think, two parts to this. One is the issue that I mentioned at the beginning around kind of accountability, right? Who's actually responsible for what? If a tenant is or an employee is taking a measurement inside the tenant space, it doesn't necessarily mean that as a building owner, you're delivering poor air quality, right? Because any number of things could be happening inside that tenant space. And so that's really the first point is to say, look, here is what I am delivering to your space. Everything after that is something that you guys need to look into, right? So telling the tenant that. And that's already really informational for the facilities management team of the tenant. Like they love hearing this because it's removed a giant question mark, which is, was my landlord doing something wrong? If you've got the data to prove that. So that's the first half. The second half is, you know, these are highly accurate sensors. We've gone through all of the standard testing certifications. It's designed to run in a duct. It provides accurate measurements in that type of environment. So it's not a random sensor that unclear origins, unclear calibration, etc. With this, you can say, look, this is the module that's inside. It was calibrated on this day against these reference monitors, and here, here is the calibration certificate to prove it. So that's a very, very different starting point. Okay, so we've got how does the downstream sensor connect to the box? So that's not shown in the images right here, but if you the Sensedge duct can be installed in two configurations. Either it's what you're seeing on the screen right now, where you simply have these two probes that are going into the duct, and they're measuring your primary air quality parameters. If you are measuring differential pressure, now that requires a probe to be inserted before the filters as well as after the filters. And so there's an extra two probes that are not shown in this image, which have tubing which plugs into the bottom of this box and goes through a different set of sensors, which is sort of isolated from the others. And so apologies for not having an image right here, but essentially what you would be seeing is an extra set of tubes coming out of the bottom of this box where right here you see these little black plugs. And those are two extra metallic probes that go into the airstream. Um, okay, we've got questions here around TVOC sensors, which chemicals are used to calibrate them. Okay, and what is it sensitive to? So TVOC is a broad spectrum sensor. It is sensitive to a number of different VOCs that may be in the air. So it's not measuring a specific one. During the calibration process, isobutylene and ethanol are both used at different times. We've got a question here. Is the data secure? We have a strict IT team. uh, So yes, this is built on the exact same foundational technology that the Sensedge Go and the Sensedge Mini platforms are. And so that means that we've gone through all the same testing, all the same third-party penetration tests. We use the exact same infrastructure for all of this. There are a couple options. You can connect this to your IT network if you desire. And we have a very robust program around this, and we work with some of the world's largest governments as well as financial institutions and have gone through many, many security reviews over multi-year processes with a lot of these firms. So there's that pathway. Alternatively, you can keep these devices completely off of your network. And so that would be with a fully wireless architecture where the Sensedge duct is communicating wirelessly to a gateway. That gateway can have a SIM card installed and be communicating to the cloud. So in that situation, you're not touching anything in the building. You're not even touching the power, right? It's running on a battery. It's not touching the power. It is communicating off of the building's existing network on a totally separate infrastructure, and then it's going straight over cellular to the cloud. So again, touching nothing in your building. Here we have a question. Can the Sensedge duct monitor be sourced in China? And can we only buy the hardware? So short answer to both of those questions is yes. We can provide these devices in virtually any country in the world. And if you want to run this offline, just having it going to your BMS and you don't want sort of the cloud piece of that and you're really just focused on automation and BMS, then that absolutely is possible. Our principles at Kaiterra are pretty simple, which is like make a platform that is as flexible as possible. If you want that data to go to the cloud and have all the full diagnostics capabilities, you can absolutely do that. If you want it to go to the BMS, you can do that. If you want to do both at the same time, you can do that. So it's really up to you. Okay, I know we're kind of coming up at time here. There's a couple other questions. Let me see if we've got one final one to round things out. Oh, one more just popped in, integrating to third-party cloud. That is also possible. And final question here. Okay, we share one air handling unit across 4 suites on a single floor. Can we put these in the branch ducts so we can isolate the data per tenant? Yes, absolutely. We actually see people doing this where you might have, especially some of these buildings in New York, for example, where you just have giant mechanical systems that are providing air supply for multiple floors or multiple tenants across one or multiple floors. You can use the Sensedge duct right after the air handling unit at sort of the main branch of the supply. You can also put this right before it enters the tenant space. So really any point along the ductwork. You can do that at the supply. You can do the same thing at the return, and that's one of the more interesting use cases that we see. If you remember at the beginning of this presentation, I talked briefly about the situation where you have a tenant 3 floors down that's renovating, or that's busy doing something. They decided to repaint all of their walls, and all those chemicals are going into the return air and being redistributed to all the other people in the building. Uh, Not great. In that situation, absolutely, you can just measure the return air for each of your tenants and see very clearly what's coming back. And if there's a problem with a micro kitchen on one floor, somebody painting the walls on another floor, you know exactly what the problem is. You can go talk to the tenant and have them, adjust how they're doing this for everyone's benefit. And ultimately, for your benefit, because like I said earlier, those other tenants are going to notice at some point and they're going to come to you, right? So why not get ahead of it instead of just waiting for the complaint to come in? On that note, thank you all very much for joining today. It was great. I was happy to see a lot of these questions come in. And if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I always love connecting with people. And thank you very much for joining today.